Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm Tony Bodoh.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer. We're really glad to have you here today.
I'm really excited, Betsy, because we've got Matt Coatney here, and he is this brilliant person that you introduced me to. And what I love about what he does is that he brings together in this intersection of business and technology, and also I would add in humanity. He brings these three things together in the work he does as a CIO, as a thought leader in so many different spaces, and there's the AI involved. There's so many different pieces to his work that to try to describe it in one or two sentences for me has been challenging. So I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to hand it over to you so you can kick this off.
I agree, Tony. I'm so excited for this conversation. I've known Matt for several years and have had the opportunity to have these conversations about business and technology and how it informs better decisions and just the pace at which things are changing. And Matt truly is an expert in this area. We've watched his TED Talk on YouTube and he's got a book coming out. So I think we should just jump right into the conversation. So Matt, welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thank you, Betsy and Tony. Thank you so much. Really appreciate being on this.
Yeah, so glad to have you here, Matt. Let's just kick it off. Just tell us about kind of your career path, how you got to where you are now, and where you're heading in the future, because you've got a lot of cool stuff going on.
Sure. Thanks. And I'm flattered by the description of me. I'll say that it's been a lot of serendipity and good fortune, and not nearly as much planning as it might sound. The journey of my career. So I've been hopping from one stone to another, hoping it leads to another side of a river and not over a waterfall. But so far so good. But yeah, I've always been enamored with technology since as early as I can remember. It was in fourth grade that my parents bought the family an IBM PC Junior. So that's dating me, going way back. But they had it. We received it on Christmas morning, and we were going to set it up the next day. I woke up at, I think, 7:30, ran downstairs and hooked everything up before anybody else was awake. So I was the computer guy from then on, but just always fascinated by technology and how we as humanity interact with it. So very early on, I was developing software and trying to build AI systems as a sixth, seventh grader. Needless to say, I was not successful, but I was always just enamored by that. And so early in my career, started as a software developer in some pretty interesting and complex industries. I helped build software for drug pharmaceutical science, so drug discovery, and really accelerating that. And so really some fascinating work. And that was really my first professional foray into AI. But the part that was most frustrating to me was as a technologist, we would build these really amazing things and then turn around and watch it fall flat in the industry for a variety of reasons, whether that was the industry was changing, we didn't have a good sense of what our users really needed, or just a whole variety of reasons that I would watch time after time the systems that we would build not reach their full potential. And so that was really, for me, that was the pivot into more of a focus on the business of technology, and really started moving into consulting and product management and executive roles like I do now. But I've been in a lot of different industries, a lot of different jobs through the course of my career. And I'm now a CTO, as Tony, as you mentioned, for a large managed services provider in the legal space. But with all of those hops, it's always been about how can I take this advanced technology and make it accessible for people? And then also on the business side, how can we make sure there's product market fit? And early on, getting feedback from users. It's sort of commonplace now, but back then that was a pretty novel concept. And how do we turn that gear quicker so we can get better results faster?
I think so many people that don't understand AI as well as you do and other technologists, it's such a nebulous thing kind of for people, but now more and more I think people are starting to understand the application of it and what it means. Because I know we talked about this the other day over coffee. We were talking about how people think AI is just Siri, and so can you talk a little bit about just that shift from AI being a technologist, dream world, to now like the common man being able to access it and have their lives changed from it?
Sure. It's evolved so much in the last 20 years. It's been a wonderful time to be in this technology and watching it evolve at such a quick pace. So it really, the term may be new, but a lot of these technologies go back really into as early as the 70s and 80s, and then really began to enter into business in the 90s and 2000s. And really the shift, the paradigm shift that happened back then was, it used to be that a person would program a computer to do a task. And you had to be very prescriptive. You would write out the instructions and literally code what that computer was going to do. So it did a really good job at that one thing you programmed it for. And then if it just veered off a little bit to the side, it'd fall off a cliff because it had never seen that experience before. It wasn't really built that way. And so the big shift was a set of algorithms around the topic of machine learning. So really the early stages of AI that helped to take a task that someone was doing, and you trained a computer the same way you would train a person. So you give it examples. You tell it how it should respond, what it's seeing. Is that an apple? Is it an orange? You're a car. Do you turn left? Do you brake? Do you turn right? All of these different scenarios. And that worked really well, but it was really expensive to do. So really only the largest enterprises for really the early 2000s into the first part of this decade, really they were the only ones that were capable of investing the time and the money into making these kinds of systems work. And what we've seen, though, and why it's so exciting to see now the world we're living in, is the barrier to entry there has dropped dramatically, and it's letting smaller organizations have a gateway into using these kinds of technologies. So it's becoming part of our common vernacular, not just personally with all of these productivity tools like Siri and Alexa, but also, and sorry for those listening, you might have just triggered your device, but it has an opportunity to just introduce this into the company, the corporate environment, and the types of businesses that small and medium entrepreneurs and organizations can leverage. And that's really exciting. But what's funny is it's all the same technology that was around 20 years ago. It's just been really supercharged with the advent of better software, better hardware, cloud computing. These are all enabling this technology that's been around for so long.
So I want to dive a little deeper into this, because as we were talking, in our prep call, you were talking about this blending of business and technology, and you've alluded to it a few times here. And there was a concept that you brought up of active listening, and AI is only going to get better if we really know how to employ active listening. So let's dive deeper in that, because I've heard about active listening all the time. Betsy and I, we wrote a book about how to listen to customers, right? And so how does that play out in the AI world, and how do you see that impacting customer experience?
Sure, absolutely. And this may seem odd for a technologist to say, but I suggest not starting with the technology. I think there's we love it. We love working with it. And our first inclination and instinct is just to jump in. And we have a tool for that. We'll solve it for you. And the reality is you have to start, to your point, with listening. So as a business person or a technologist, listen to what the problems that your clients have. And do the 5 whys, right? Really dig deep. Why are they experiencing that? And then once you've done that, understand what's the right blend of people, process, and technology that can help solve for that. And so to your point, it might be that someone is having a real challenge that technology could solve, but it's only happening once a year. And maybe it'll affect a couple $100,000 in annualized revenue or cost savings, but it's a relatively small number for a large business, and it only happens once a year, once a decade maybe. That's really not a good fit for technology. Now, if it's a pain point they're experiencing multiple times a day, it has a real impact on revenue, and it is too large of a problem to tackle with an extra team member or a process, then technology can start to become efficient and cost effective in solving that. So it really does it's back to basics, honestly. So technology is just another tool that we have on our tool belt, and ensuring that we're not jumping the gun and going to that shiny object first.
I was just going to say the shiny object thing is a real problem for entrepreneurs, but also technology, I would think, and I love that point about starting with the problem and really listening. The 5 why, I love that process. For our listeners that may not know what we're referring to, it's just asking the question why after every answer at least 5 times to really get to the root of what the issue is. And so I think that's a really important point, because I think sometimes people think technology is just a quick fix for anything, and it may not be fixing the right thing.
Absolutely. And we have 3 children. Our youngest is in 1st grade. So I always say, act like a 1st grader. Well, why? Just keep going. They know how to do that really well. So it's relearning that skill.
Yeah, it is a great skill. And particularly when listening to your customers, because they may tell you what they think is the reason why, but when you dig and really listen, then you get to what you really need to know.
That's right. And there is a real challenge in AI adoption or technology adoption in general, and especially sort of ceding control to a technology helping to make decisions. And their listening comes into play as well, because really at the root of a lot of the objections is fear. It's fear of losing control, losing a job, being displaced, and there is a real risk there and a real concern. And so listening to that, being empathetic, and helping to identify where there's opportunity that it creates. So yes, you're not doing this anymore, but it lets you refocus over here, and that adds more value. And that's something only people can do. And it's a great marketable skill for you. If you can get people over that hump, they will start to embrace it. And then they'll become advocates for you, and they can help advocate to the rest of the organization saying, hey, no, this is great. This is actually helping, and here's how. And you don't have to be afraid of it. But you have to start with that empathy, because again, if you're coming in with a hammer and just saying this is going to fix everything and not taking the people element into it, you just won't be successful.
As I think about the customer engagement side of AI and what's possible today, what will be possible in a very short period of time, I think back to 2007, the first time I was actually introduced and start using machine learning. It wasn't even called AI in the format I was using, but it was for text mining on surveys, understanding what problems existed out there. And when I think back to those days, the rules we had to write, how we had to train the machines, it was hard work. And I don't know that it's any easier today, but there's definitely been some advancements. Walk us through some of those advancements that have happened, because we were just listening and trying to get alerts, if you will, when certain things were said or written. But today it's beyond just getting alerts so we can send a human to go do something. Now it's like, let's actually go solve a problem for a customer so a human never has to touch it. So take us through like what has changed, and what do you see like on the horizon for that same area?
Oh, great question, Tony. So the way that I liken this or describe it is it's really in a couple of different camps. So there's been software improvements, there have been hardware improvements, and there have been data improvements. And so those 3 pillars, those 3 angles have all grown considerably in the last 10 years. And those are the same 3 areas that we're watching to how they continue to evolve. So I'll start with software. It's the best way to describe it is there has been an improvement in the way that these algorithms work, where they can be much more nuanced. So it used to be fairly black and white or fairly statistical in the way that it would make these decisions. And it was just it just wasn't very sophisticated, but it did the job well for the types of things we were solving for. And to your point, Tony, back in the day, we would write a lot of rules to help coach and guide. So it was very human or domain expert driven. The software now is able to basically automatically derive those rules from data. And so that it knows the nuance better because it's sort of studied that corpus of information. And the algorithms can be now much more complex, and they stack in complexity, much like our brains do, taking sort of simple concepts and abstracting up into these more abstract and nuanced definitions and things like that. These algorithms can now do that. And that's, if you've heard the term deep neural nets or deep learning, that's what that is. It's effectively stacking multiple layers of these algorithms so that they can be more human-like. But that's only been possible because of the advancements on the computing side, on the hardware. If you look back to what we could do back in the 1990s, the phone in your pocket today is more powerful than a supercomputer from the 1980s. And the computer on your desk is quite a bit more powerful. So if you just look at the raw computing power, that has made these type of algorithms possible. And then lastly, data, same thing. Data has been exploding. There's so much more that we have to work with as data scientists and as businesses that we can now look at trends and really dig deep into data that just wasn't there 10 or 15 years ago. And there's a term I like to use called data exhaust. So back to your point, Tony, the hard part back in the day was trying to get all this data assembled and to actually ask people to train these algorithms. And it was difficult. It was time consuming. It was expensive. Well, we have so much of this data exhaust, or this trail that we leave behind when we're just doing our job or living our lives, whether it's social media, email, documents we're creating, sites we're visiting. There are privacy implications there. So ensuring that we're balancing and making sure that we're looking at this from an anonymized lens, that we're reducing the chance for bias. But there's a way to look at all this data that's happening in our lives and build some really sophisticated capabilities to help understand what your clients are really doing, not just what they're saying, but what they're actually doing, and then making better decisions from that. And that's really transformational. And I do feel, to your point, you have to do both. You have to talk to your clients, you have to talk to your customers, you have to then look at what's really happening in the environment and try to marry the two up. And where there's dissonance between those two, that's where a lot of opportunity lies. If they're saying something, they're doing something else, that's an opportunity to drive a better outcome.
So Matt, along those lines, talk to us a little bit about how AI is getting built into sales and marketing, for example, and what that means for growing a company.
Sure. Yeah. When we were prepping for this, that was one of the topics that I got really animated and excited about, because there was a fear that I had, and I think a lot of us in the industry had, that over the last couple of years, that a monopoly was starting to form around the big four, right? You had Google, Facebook, and Apple and Amazon, and Microsoft too, right? So you had those industries or those companies really starting to build capability at a pace that no other organization could keep up. They were too well funded, too large of an organization. And so had they kept that to themselves, we really would have seen a scenario where another AI winter, where there just wasn't a lot of innovation. Thankfully, those companies decided we're going to open this up. And it wasn't entirely altruistic, because they learned that it's another business model where they can drive revenue. And so instead of these very close circuit environments, they've now created an ecosystem and an economy around selling AI as a service. And so, Betsy, to that point, companies are now able to embed AI into their software that they're using for a variety of needs at a fraction of the cost it used to take. I'll give one quick example, and then I'll get into the sales and marketing. But just to give you an idea of what that, just to give you a story around that, back in 2005, I was at a software company called LexisNexis. They do legal research, and we were building an AI type of knowledge management tool for the legal industry. We spent about a year and a half. There were 5 of us working on this project to take it to market. Just on the technology side, probably all in, it was about a $2 million, 1.5 year investment. Pretty significant, but that was typical back then. Fast forward to about 12 years later, I helped an adjacent industry, it was higher education, build effectively the same type of tool. All the same capability and so forth, but built on top of AWS and Microsoft Azure. We built that in a 2-month period with 1.5 people for a total of investment of about $50,000 for the client. Just orders of magnitude, both in time and money. So really transformational. And so, Betsy, to your point, these technologies are still very tough. But you still have to be a technologist to integrate them. They're not so easy that it's drag and drop. They're trying to head that direction, but not there yet. So you still have to be an engineer. But what we find is that small and medium-sized businesses have access now to these tools through the products they use. So from a sales and marketing perspective, think Salesforce, HubSpot. They have started to build these capabilities directly into their solutions so that you as a business owner can benefit from them without having to have that full technology organization and developers and all of that behind you. So that's really transformational. And I'm seeing that across every sector of the economy, whether it's cybersecurity, operations, finance, HR, all of them have these elements of AI now built in. It's like the dashboards or the business intelligence of 10, 15 years ago. It's just becoming commonplace, which is really spectacular.
I love how you talked about the way it's being integrated here. I'm going to go down a path we didn't prep for, so we'll see where this goes.
Sure.
There's a philosophical challenge that I've had over the course of my career, because I started out as a marketing analyst, so it was all quantitative. I moved into the experience field about 6 or 7 years into that journey of mine. And what I see again and again is technology typically tells us the what, the quantitative. This is what happened. So if I go analyze the flow of a customer journey, let's say on a website, I can see if they click this, this, and this, they're likely to do this. I can see if they've done this, I should present other customers like this, Amazon, right? The concern I have is if we continue down that path, we lose the why. And that's where the understanding the emotion, understanding the context of why someone's making choices, all those things that psychologists really study. I have a concern that our machines may get so good at the what that people just fundamentally ignore the why. And that's such a critical part to life itself. So I'm just curious. I just want to leave that open. So what would you say in response to that?
I couldn't agree more. I have that same concern. And that's a lot of why I put focus around the people in this mix, because, and look, AI may eventually get to the point where it helps us understand the why as well, which that'll be quite a day. But in the interim, we're far off on that. In the interim, I don't view these technologies as displacing human thought or human effort. I see it actually as elevating it. And we talk a bit about this notion of what we're really doing is creating a society of managers, of leaders and entrepreneurs. And they're the cloud, the capabilities they're working with are no longer just people. It's people and machines. And so in many cases, the technology will help with it. Really narrow tasks and to your point, sort of getting to the what of things. But then the people side of that equation necessarily needs to ask the why and put that synthesis and around it, right? And that really elevates our value as humans. Like that's putting the optimistic lens on it. We get to do the things that are truly unique to us, and we're not spending 80% of our time cranking through data, which a machine is going to do so much better at. So it can be liberating, but that's for those people that enjoy that kind of work and want to do that. It is a different story for those that take solace in and comfort in doing something that's relatively routinized. So that's the downside of it for sure.
Matt, let's shift gears a little bit. I recently had the good fortune of getting a sneak peek at the book you have coming out. And so tell us about that book. I think some of the concepts in it are just so exciting for the future. And so talk to us a little bit about the book.
Sure. So it is called The Human Cloud, and it's how AI and freelance are transforming work. And this is another one of those dumb luck serendipity moments for me. This was not premeditated by any stretch, but I am a bit of a freelancer myself, so I dabble. I'm mostly in my day job as I'm an executive, and I've followed that track well, but I just have a passion for other pursuits that require me doing some freelancing. And it's not the money, it's more just the opportunity to do a variety of different creative outlet tasks. And one of those is writing. So I happened to do some ghostwriting for an individual who at the time was, he was formerly at a company called Gixter and then went to Microsoft, where he led their future of work. So he was a freelance economy expert and very brilliant young guy. And so I did some ghostwriting for him. And I'll never forget, he said, well, I'm working on a book and I need someone that has more of that technology lens, because I think that would be a neat combination of freelance and technology. So we sort of combined those concepts, and the famous last words were, it's about 90% done. So we shopped around for a good while, probably about 18 months, and had a lot of rejections, as is the typical story for writers. But we did end up, with the help of our agent, John Willig, we landed with HarperCollins Leadership. And what a great imprint, great opportunity. So the book was not 90% written. It took us about 6 months, but we reshaped it into a really, I think, compelling story that will be launched in January of 2021. But Betsy, to your point, so the book is all about how these dual trends of AI, which is my background, and freelance, really high-end freelance, sort of gig economy work, that these two trends will fundamentally transform the way that businesses operate going forward. And we talk a lot about why that is and how that's going to happen, and then what the company and the person of the future will look like. And it really, at its essence, is disrupting the advantages that large corporations have by having full-time FTEs, people on staff. And that made sense in the 1900s because they got economies of scale. They reduced the friction of a lot of different interactions with different suppliers. And if they brought more of that in-house, they would get that economy of scale and improve their profit margins. That made sense. Now we have technology that's coming in and disrupting that. It can be easier to find a freelancer in India that knows exactly how to program this particular type of software. And you can bring them in today and have it done tomorrow at a fraction of the price that you would to try to have one of your engineers learn that trade and then do the work. And so that kind of disruption has been profound. And it's really, we're starting to see that hockey stick today in COVID world, where we're all remote work. The notion of having an office doesn't necessarily make sense as much anymore. That opens yet another door into this freelance world. So it's exciting. It was a whole world I didn't really know a lot about until a couple of years ago. I'd say I'm a journeyman at this point.
Yeah, I think Tony and I are seeing this as well, where companies are just going out and finding the best person / consultant for the job, and pulling together a team of people that can work on projects versus all the full-time employees. So, well, I can't recommend your book enough. I was so fascinated by it, and really excited for it to come out to the mass market, so that lots of people can get a chance to read that book.
Thank you.
I'm intrigued by the book too, because it's one of those things that I think is, in a sense, long overdue. This whole idea of freelance in the gig economy. A lot of people have talked about it, but Betsy and I have been working together for 2 or 3 years now on various projects, and we both have our own companies, but we also don't have a huge team behind us because we bring the team on board as the projects shift and as the demands shift, and that's the way I've run my business since 2009. I don't have employees. I never have had employees because I bring in contractors for particular projects. And so I find it very fascinating. And what I'm curious, as you look at this, we've got the machines coming in, we've got the people being replaced. In a sense, what has to happen for the freelancer? There's kind of 2 questions I have here, so I'll go with the first one. What has to happen for the freelancer to be successful in this space with that technology coming in, so they don't get too tied into how to do a very narrow set of tasks that are going to be in a couple of years gone? They don't need to be there.
Right. Now, great question. I think that freelancers, if done right, are better prepared for potential displacement than a traditional organic employee, because the freelancer, and you all know this, and I know it as well from my work, it's when you're hungry for work, you'll pick up most anything, and you can get a little bit more discerning as your business grows. But early on, you're taking all kinds of projects that are sort of fit in your lane, but stretch you. So you're learning a lot of different techniques and skills. You're also starting to see patterns across trends and industries and things like that. And so you become more nuanced, more complex thought. And those are the things that guard against being displaced. And so the very work of a freelancer, I think, helps with that. And that said, the hardest part of a freelancer I've found is all of the non-billable work, administrative work that you do. It can sap 25, 30, 50% of your time, everything from setting up meetings to handling payment to, you name it, contracts, et cetera. And so that's part of what our book talks about is, in many ways, technology is liberating for the freelancer. It can automate some of the things that you don't want to be focused on and that are not driving your value so that you can do more of the work that is driving value and creating revenue. And that's a big shift. And we talk about freelancers can use, to your point, other freelancers and technology combined to handle different pieces of that, to have this sort of holistic, again, you're sort of a company of one, but you're leveraging all of these resources, both human and machine, to get work done and create value.
Excellent. And so now the other part to the question there is, I've got two daughters, one's 15, one's 17, right? They're getting ready to go to college, is going to be here sooner than I want to admit. And as a parent, I'm out there trying to understand, where do I encourage them? The job world that I came out of college in 1997 does not exist anymore. I mean, it's gone. They're coming out, 25 years, 30 years after that, once they get out of college. What should they be preparing for? What should any parent, I know this isn't a parenting show, but a lot of people listening are parents. What should they be preparing their kids for so they're ready for this?
That's so good. It hits home for me as well, as my oldest is going to be 14 in a couple of weeks. So not far behind yours. I think for me, it goes back to core principles of really, to me, it matters less what they go into and more the skills they have, especially relationship, emotional intelligence, networking, sort of the ability to connect with people, which is hard to learn in a school, but you can get through real life experience and coaches. Having curiosity and a desire to learn, be a lifelong learner, and really that notion of sharpening the axe, sort of every day working on something. Those are the kind of skills. And again, the challenges are traditional institutions aren't geared toward that. So to me, I'd say anything that they're passionate about, fueling that passion, but giving them the tools to be successful in that passion, because you can really build a business or a successful career in just about anything if you approach it correctly. So it's more about that foundational training. Not a great answer, I know, because you're saying, well, go get this degree. To your point, most of those degrees, most of those jobs won't exist in 10 or 15 years. So you gotta fall back on those first principles.
I'm wondering if even some of those universities will exist in 10 years with the big shift in that.
So I think one of the key things that I learned through my career and what I really attribute to my success were the types of roles that I had early on. So to your question, Tony, not so much where they go, but what they do right after. And the roles that I found to be the best at learning quickly and learning a lot, startups. I did several startups in my early career and learned a ton because you're sort of thrown in the fray at the very beginning. Consulting of any variety, management consulting, et cetera, because again, you're thrown in a variety of different client contexts and you get that kind of experience over and over. So it's, again, that turns of the wheel, as much experience as you can get as early on. And then also freelancing is another great way for young folks to get introduced into the work environment at a very low, sort of a low inertia, low entry. But things like that, sales is another good example of that. Anything that has a lot of something and a lot of variety that you get a quick experience on really helped me set up later for better success than some of my peers that were still sort of doing the same few tasks that they had done for 3 years in a large organization. That has its merits too, but I definitely steer folks toward more of an entrepreneurial kind of track because you just learn so much.
Such a great answer to that question. Couldn't agree with you more, Matt. Switching gears a little bit, one of the things we love to do on the show is give our guests an opportunity to give a shout out to a nonprofit community organization that you may have alignment with or a passion for. So what are some organizations that have a piece of your heart, Matt?
Sure. I have two. The first one was actually Betsy, where we first met. So there's an organization, and I live in Dayton, Ohio. It's an organization called Bridget's Path that helps, wonderful mission of helping babies that have been drug exposed through their birth, helping them wean off of that in a natural setting with a caring environment, and then also support system for the mothers and the families to really break that cycle. We have been hard hit, as many areas have been, by the opioid epidemic and other drugs in the environment, in the area. And so, but just a great place. I had the honor of serving on their board for a couple of years early on in their formation, sort of a startup for a nonprofit. But they just celebrated their 100th baby coming into the facility and leaving. And so just a wonderful organization. So I wanted to give them a shout out. And then just also, since I'm a technologist, I have to say I'm currently on the board of Technology First, which is a IT networking organization locally here in Southwest Ohio. Again, just honorable the work that they're doing and trying to instill the skills, not just technical skills, but soft skills, leadership skills in the youth and in the next generation of IT professionals. And I'd love to be a part of that and help where I can.
That's awesome, Matt. Thank you so much. We are so honored to have you on the show. We can't wait for your book to come out. And just thank you again for your time. And as we were talking after our prep, we're like, there's more to this conversation. So we may see you back at the start of season 2.
Sure, I'd be honored. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for being here.
Matt.
Thank you very much.
Betsy, this interview was just so fun and at the same time very deep, very interesting to me, primarily because I have played in the same space as Matt, just from a different perspective. It's that business and technology integration. I've often told people that I'm a translator between the business side and the technology side. I've never officially been a technology employee, but I've played that space and translated between the two. And then understanding how the humanity of it is so important yet. And as an example, as he was closing out talking about the advice for parents, he talks about the soft skills. Of all things, a CTO, a technology guy, an AI guy is talking about the importance of soft skills. That hit me in really shows me that humanity is really the element we have to be concerned most about. As we've often talked about on this show, listening to your customer, really knowing your customer is about knowing who they are as an individual, not just the data about them.
Yeah, I love that part. And it's just so important. And I think part of the fear comes from people who don't think that's going to happen, that like, oh, humans are going to be replaced by technology. And that does create a lot of fear. It would make me nervous if I thought that. I don't happen to believe that, because I do believe that the human side is so critical. But it is awesome to hear a technology executive talk about how important those human skills are. Tony, the other point that he made that I really grabbed hold of is just this whole future of work. And like I said, when we were talking, I got to read his book, and it really opened my eyes to just how different the workforce and the just business in general is going to look in the near future. And so I think some of these things that he's talking about and how AI is a part of that are just really fascinating. The good news is, and we will put this in the show notes, there is a link to go ahead and pre-order Matt's book. So we'll have that in the show notes. So if you're interested in reading about that future of work, we will have the ability for you to get your hands on the copy of the book as soon as it comes out.
Absolutely. And I think, just kind of my final thought here is that really, if you're concerned about AI, I think diving in and understanding the value it brings, the way it frees up humanity for the higher work. I was thinking, and I didn't get a chance to say this during the show, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're letting machines do the things that are repetitive and rote and that really are not elevating the human species anymore. They may have at one point in time, but now there are things that we can put our minds to, and we can thrive and flourish in new and grand ways. And I love that we can free ourselves from that, as scary as it might be for some people, and at the same time look to this higher, what is possible down the road.
Right. And that higher value being the deep listening to your customers. That's what you and I are all about, is listening to your customers. And if you are not so busy doing these rote things that machine learning can do, then you have more ability to spend that time listening to your customers. All right. Well, Tony, it was a great conversation. Always a pleasure to do this with you. Listeners, if you would like to leave us a review, we would greatly appreciate it. Tell your friends about our podcast. It's available on every podcast platform out there. But as always, we really appreciate you being here and being a loyal listener to our show. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.